Thanks for staying on. Tebogo, Khaas, the founder and chairperson of Public Interest South Africa, has expressed discontent with the NPA for its failure to tackle corruption effectively in the country. In an opinion piece in the City Press, Khaas asserted that prosecuting corrupt officials in both the public and private sector, even those at the highest levels, will not put an end to or deter future corruption. He's joining us now for more insight into that piece. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Thabo.
I want to say the NPA is giving us an honest assessment of the limitations that they are working with, right? Currently, it operates at only 52% of the required capacity, right? Hindering its ability to effectively prosecute criminal cases. Having said all that, though, they are, of course, in the meantime, being able to recover something close to, 5 billion rands in stolen funds by the National Prosecuting Authority. Are you not being too harsh on that?
Maybe we should lower our expectations, all of us as citizens, but certainly we shouldn't. I don't think we should. It's a very, very serious matter, because to be told that the NPA has recovered 5.2 billion, for instance, over a period of 4 years during Advocate Batohi's tenure, is just an insult, because quite honestly, opportunity cost, more could have been recovered, but for the inefficiencies, ineptitude, and the kind of poor planning and management of case management at the NPA. That is why we're sitting where we are. And in fact, other people are eating our lunch. The US Department of Justice is eating our lunch. Some of the fines, most of the fines have actually gone to the US Treasury, not our Treasury. Let me use a recent example. Of the fines that were levied to McKinsey with regards to what they've done at ESCOM and elsewhere, they've paid over 2 billion, 2.2 to be exact, 2.2 billion to the US Department of Justice. So that went to the Americans. People were not affected by what McKinsey did at SARS. We only got half of that, 1.1 billion.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, 2/3 goes to the US, 1/3 comes to South Africa. The victims are not recovering to the extent that they ought to be, only because the NPA is sleeping, is snoozing, and the US DOJ is actually hitting on all, operating on all cylinders. Yeah. So that is the nub of the matter.
Well, the NPA, of course, works at the mercy, really, of the Department of Justice, and they can only work with the resources that they are given at this particular point in time. It seems, with the 225 outstanding cases, many which have stalled at the special tribunal, it's just a case of, one, there is insufficiently trained investigators who understand this intricate kind of cases, and that is a function of just resources that are not available. And South Africa, as a country, we are told, is overstretched in terms of resources, including the Hawks don't have the resources, the SIU doesn't have the resources, never mind the NPA.
We've heard that story about resources many times, and let me just use case studies, examples, just to rebut any such. You've got a matter that was enrolled at the Mbombela Regional or Magistrate Court in 2018 to do with the FIFA 2010 World Cup construction corruption. That matter was enrolled, it was partly heard, but then it was moved to the Pretoria High Court in Gauteng. That was 2018. Tell me, why is it that matter is still not enrolled at the High Court? Is it because they lack resources? A matter that was fully investigated and presented to court in Mpumalanga, and all that was needed was just for the matter to be taken to the Pretoria High Court and re-enrolled and make sure that it runs. The same thing, what happened with the recent case involving Zizi Kodwa, his business partners? Are you saying it's lack of resources? No. It's ineptitude and basically the kind of things that is frustrating the public, because the NPA does not seem to know what it's doing. How do you take a matter to the Palm Springs court and say, here's the matter, and then later on, one of your own who ought to have been involved say, sorry, no, we got it wrong. We're actually dropping the charges. Yeah. Does this have anything to do with resources? Forget about resources.
Well, I mean, it could have to do with the fact what the Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Billy Mulwasi, was revealing here. He's saying that most cases, forensic investigators need to be commissioned to stand as expert witnesses.
Yeah, but then why do you charge when you haven't done that? Is that got to do with resources? Why do you charge? Why do you then rush to charge people, present them to court, and then when it's time to go to court, say, oh, sorry, we forgot, we didn't do expert witness and all this? No, that's absolute nonsense. And the NPA has to accept that it is failing the public. And the NPA has to lift its socks and make sure that it does what it's mandated to do, to prosecute without fear, favor, or prejudice. In this instance, the public is being prejudiced because of the NPA's ineptitude. And in any event, it looks like the NPA has lost the appetite to even prosecute. Hence, they actually find it, they can hang on the coattails of the U.S. Department of Justice and other jurisdictions to do their dirty work, including, if you recall, the Steinhoff matter that was actually even decided in Germany or one of the European countries, but I think it was Germany. And when the matter actually involves us, South African, the pension funds that the PIC and other local institutions who have lost, pensioners have had their monies at risk and lost through Steinhoff. But the NPA has thought to get others, PwC, do the research, do the report for us, or can we benefit from that? The NPA is the litigator of last resort, is our Reserve Bank of South Africa. If you say the Reserve Bank is broke, then we are broke as a country. The same analogy you can use for the NPA. If you say you are broke, we don't have the resources, what you're basically sending is a message to the public or to the criminals that you can get away with anything that you want. We are at your, at your mercy. So do as you please. So it does not inspire confidence.
So what will it take for that to be rectified? Because it seems there is no commitment or even appetite to have the difficult conversation about whether or not the leadership at the NPA currently is competent and is the right leadership.
What did you take, amongst many other things, is for the NPA to accept that it is failing or it has failed and not to shift blame to others. In this instance, they're trying to shift blame to the SA Police Service. And the SA Police Service doesn't present or argue matters in court. It is the NPA. So the NPA has to accept that to start with and make sure that it does the best from what it has, the resources that it, within the resource constraints that it has, make the best of the cases that it can lend. You don't need more resources to actually to litigate that matter that I referred to earlier, the one that started in Mpumalanga. How much, so you need to make sure that your case management is proper, and you make sure that you show the zeal and make sure, and you don't have to investigate. If you're going to charge somebody with 100,000 counts, when 1 or 2 counts could have sufficed. Because as you know, most of these things, when you go to sentence, they say they'll all run concurrently. And yet it take you 10 years to litigate when you could have actually investigated 2 counts and make sure that they stick, and then you get a conviction. But the NPA doesn't seem to think like that. Instead, they want to shift blame. So the NPA has to stop blame shifting and do the basics right. We appreciate and empathize with the NPA to the extent that it may not have the resources that it needs, but it must show that the resources that it has, it manages to do most with it, just as the SIUs do. The SIU, never hear the SIU saying, pointing fingers at others, saying, you are not doing this, or we are not getting resources, or we are not doing this. They work with what they have. Everybody has to pull their weight, including the NPA.
What do you make of the latest reporting? I think one of the Sunday papers would be carrying a story that says that the former now Minister of Justice, moved to Human Settlement, would have blocked the renewal of the contract of one of the evidence leaders of state capture.
Well, we don't know about that, but for example, we do know for a fact, about the details about that report that you just mentioned. But suffice to say that we do have 2 senior investigators who used to be involved with the State Capture Commission, and we do appreciate the fact that the NPA has sought to want to allay fears or concerns that there may have been impropriety in terms of their appointment. Indeed, by legislation, the NPA is entitled or is allowed to make such type of appointments. But to the extent that it is an allegation that the minister would have blocked it or was blocking it, we don't know, and we cannot really comment much on something that we're not fairly confident in terms or appreciate the actual facts as to what is the position that the minister or the former minister had, and why was that she took that decision.
But doesn't inspire confidence in you in terms of
It does not. And when you talk,
political interference, are we finding ourselves at that point again that there could be a possibility of political interference?
It could very well be, but even before you even address that question, the question is, why is it that NPA itself is not transparent? There's no transparency within the NPA. For example, the United States Department of Justice has published the deferred agreement, the deferred prosecution agreement with McKinsey and the former CEO Vikesh Sagar of McKinsey. But those details are published on their website. You go there, you'll get it. But the NPA doesn't. Why, you ask yourself? We just need to know what it is that you agreed to McKinsey and others so that we as civil society organizations can hold you to account and make sure that you keep you on track to make sure you remain true north in terms of enforcing whatever was agreed into. But we don't seem to see that transparency. So on the one hand, we hear this allegation that the former minister may have interfered, but we don't know what else the interference has been on other cases, including the one that I've just told you involving Zizi Koto. What interference was there? And you talk about somebody who actually has got a cloud, the Gauteng, the Joburg the prosecutor advocate Chauka, who's got a cloud, who the NPA head herself had recommended to the president to actually suspend him. And the man is still in there and making such crucial decision as to throw away the cases. So you ask yourself, where's transparency in that? Before you ask about what the former minister may have or may not have done, here's a matter we say, the NPA, come clean, tell us what are the issues involved in here. And yet we are none the wiser, even today.
Bidwan, South Africa, asking the Minister of Justice around the workings and the challenges of the NPA, have made some suggestions on the reform. One, in order to expedite the cases of corruption, they're saying the NPA must be better staffed with seasoned prosecutors, ensuring expertise are there to tackle complex financial crimes. Two, allow whistleblowers to report corruption anonymously with robust protection against retaliation, and enable public to submit evidence directly, creating a streamlined and transparent process for holding the corrupt accountable. I think these measures would be enough to reform the NPA.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm glad you actually asked. I'll start with the second part first. You see this cap in front of me, it says whistleblowers matter. In the current dispensation, it appears to us that whistleblowers do not matter at all. We forget, we talk about McKinsey, we talk about SAP, ABB, and we forget that there are individuals who took risks and reported and blew the whistles on those matter. When we recover the billions that we are now being told is being recovered and put in the caravan, nothing is heard about the plight of the whistleblowers, some of whom have gone through very deep hardships, and they're still going through that today. We're not hearing people saying, how can we help? I'm talking about government. How can we help? How can you make sure that we mitigate the hardship that you've gone through? So whistleblowers matter, and without whistleblowers in this instance, we would not have recovered the kind of monies that the NPA now boasts and gloats about. Point number one. Point number two, seasoned investigators are important in terms of making sure that you can get watertight, if I may use that term, watertight case presented to court. But you can still have expert witnesses. When you start, you mention about expert witnesses. Accountants, you don't have to have a lawyer who's an accountant or a prosecutor who's an accountant, an engineer, and all those. You can actually leverage off the resources that may be also outside of the organization. So all you need to do is to have people who appreciate the law, who know how to put together a case and make sure that it's presented before court. And therefore, you won't have cases being thrown out or running longer than they ought to be. So those are the two critical issues. But in all this, the common thread is make sure that the whistleblower ecosystem, the anti-corruption policies of both the SOEs, municipalities, and all this is up to date. And we must make sure that a society on its own lifts its weight in terms of anti-corruption measures, because we shouldn't be looking only to government to help us, because we know somebody who takes telecoms lines unlawfully, or who taps into Eskom's grid unlawfully. But we keep a blind eye. Only when things don't work, we say, but government is not doing that. We need to, as society, this is an all-of-society effort, not just the NPA, not just SAPS, not just government, the DOJ, but us also as society need to also make sure that we stop these things. And which is why we're asking today, where is the moral regeneration movement today? Because the moral regeneration movement ought to have been center in terms of making sure you shape society's attitude towards, being accepting of the kind of level of crime that you see when you keep a blind eye. And we ask ourselves, would it help even if we start another similar organizations, which I don't think would be helpful. We need to take stock of what we as society, as individuals, are doing in our own spaces to stem the level of crime and corruption. Let us refuse to bribe. I'm going to use this opportunity just quickly to make a shout out to police officers in Tshwane this morning, who really showed that officers, not all officers are corrupt. When they were presented with a case where they could have put certain individuals under pressure to extort money because there was some non-compliance of sort, they sought to make sure that those individuals do the right thing and correct the situation without even suggesting that, So we need everybody to make sure that society needs to have an attitude, both from the police, law enforcement system, and us individuals to make sure we don't pay bribes, we don't do those, we don't sell illicit goods.
Finally, I'm going to let you go. Because you've raised this quite sharply around the transparency of the McKinsey deal, also around the quantum itself, that we're only getting a third, while the US would have gotten a lion's share of this. Do you think these kind of arrangements or these agreements that the NPA is getting into as civil society, these are the accepted processes that we should accept as society, that they will have these deals? Admittedly, are they also effective in deterring corruption in the private sector in particular?
No, absolutely. Look, deferred prosecution agreements are a norm globally. It's nothing new. But what you're asking for is transparency on the part of the NPA. And we have written to the NPA, by the way, and asking them to actually come up clean. We are still waiting for a response. They've acknowledged receipt of our correspondence, but we still, and otherwise, we're not even going to hold our fingers thinking that they're going to respond and positively. Because as history tells us that we are not going to find the kind of response that we would get from the NPA. In fact, we're better off even asking the US DOJ to actually give us any information that they may have in their possession with regards to the NPA's, the local NPA's agreement with the local McKinsey Africa. So it just tells you that our sovereign does not do what you and I, citizens, expect of it to do. And how they treat us with professional disdain is something that is really regrettable, and would like for the NPA to think twice, because we are not enemies of NPA, we're not enemies of the police, but we need to be able to point fingers, to shine a light where we believe a lot more could be done better.
Tebogo, Khaas, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Tebogo, founder and chairperson of Public Interest South Africa.